Hey everyone, Brian here. In your PDF, you were asked to jot down the most devastating events in European history. Did you think of the Black Death? Yep, that checks out. World War I? World War II? Of course. How about the 30 Years' War? How many of you had that one down? Yes, historians, it's the most important event in European history that you've likely never heard of. Our essential questions will all pertain to the 30 Years' War, as we'll be finding out what led to it, what were the events of it, and why was the impact of it so great. In order to examine the roots of absolutism in Central Europe, we need look no further than the 30 Years' War. In the 16th century, Central Europe, the map area largely occupied by modern-day Germany, was dominated by the Holy Roman Empire, or HRE. Once powerful and centralized, at this point the HRE was a collection of kingdoms loosely under the influence of the imperial crown. Founded in 800 CE, the empire was meant to be unified by religion, thus holy, and the state religion was the Roman Catholic Church. It was meant to carry on the tradition of classical Roman rule. But the Protestant Reformation, a 16th century religious movement started by Martin Luther, splintered Catholic unity in Europe. At the time, the House of Habsburg, a prominent European royal family, ruled the Holy Roman Empire. On the HRE's eastern edge was the sprawling Ottoman Empire, the Anatolian absolutists. The Ottomans' greatest ruler was Suleiman the Magnificent. Under Suleiman, this Islamic empire greatly expanded its territorial reach and became modernized. Eventually, the Ottomans fell behind the bordering Habsburg and Russian empires, but still maintained an absolutist tradition, led by a sultan who was believed to be responsible only to God. The Ottomans are worth noting not only because there was a bit of a Habsburg-Ottoman border rivalry, but also because absolute rulers on your border tend to encourage, well, more absolute rulers. Meanwhile, in the Habsburg HRE, internal religious tensions between Catholics and Protestants were boiling. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 quelled those tensions, establishing a principle of cuius regio, eius religio, which means whoever rules chooses the religion of the kingdom. So now you've got Catholic kingdoms and Lutheran kingdoms. Take a minute to respond to the following question. What challenges may arise as a result of the policy of whoever rules chooses the religion of the kingdom? Explain. You may have wondered what happens when a Catholic ruler has Lutheran subjects, or vice versa. That's a great question. Rudolf II had that issue in Bohemia, a Protestant HRE principality. Not wanting to alienate the people, Rudolf reluctantly granted them religious freedom. But just 10 years later, the super Catholic Ferdinand II was set to take over as King of Bohemia and revoked this freedom. Enraged, a Protestant mob approached Catholic officials in their offices at the royal palace in Prague. In the ensuing melee, the mob backed the officials up against an open window 70 feet above the ground and threw them out. And they survived, because according to unverified Protestant accounts, they fell into a giant pile of manure. On the other hand, Catholics maintained that the officials were saved by divine intervention. This event was called the defenestration, a fancy word for throwing someone out a window, of Prague. And believe it or not, the Bohemians had a habit of doing this. It was the third notable defenestration in Prague's history. A side note, one survivor, Philip Fabricius, was granted nobility by the emperor and named Baron von Hohenfall, or Baron of Highfall. Seriously, this guy's noble title was about the time he got tossed out a window. Okay, back to said window tossing, it actually had some serious repercussions. It pitted Habsburg Catholics and Bohemian Protestants against each other at the beginning of a conflict that would later be known as the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War was a religious and political war fought largely within the Holy Roman Empire between 1618 and, 1618 plus 30, 1648. You may have noticed that it was a religious and a political conflict. Before we continue, think about this. Why are most wars fought today? We can break the 30 Years' War into 4 phases. The first 2, the Bohemian and Danish phases, were more localized and based on religion. The second 2, the Swedish and French phases, were larger in scale and motivated by politics. You will likely note that this is a more common reason for wars to be fought today. The Bohemian phase began with the defenestration of Prague, sparking the Bohemian Revolt. Ferdinand II swiftly crushed this revolt. This crushing raised concerns among other Protestant rulers, namely King Christian IV of Denmark. Between 1625 and 1629, the Danes lent support to the German Lutherans in the HRE, but were also dominated by the Imperial Habsburg army. Then a turning point, the Swedish phase. The year was 1629. Enter Swedish King Gustavus Adolphus. He was a Lutheran, but religion wasn't his main motivation. He wanted to secure control of trade on the Baltic Sea. Why do you think Gustavus Adolphus would use this opportunity to make a land grab? The Swedes were pretty successful at said land grab, ousting the Habsburgs from northern Germany. Gustavus Adolphus was an innovator on the battlefield, using mobile artillery to position his attack where it was needed most on short notice. He revolutionized the way that European wars were fought, leading to the Swedish king being dubbed the father of modern warfare. And while the Swedes were doing the fighting, they had financial help from Catholic France. So why do you think France would join in on the Protestant side? Formulate some theories in your PDF. As you learned, the war was becoming a geopolitical dispute rather than a religious one. France's southern neighbor, Spain, was also ruled by the Habsburgs. Cardinal Richelieu, First Minister of France, feared Habsburg power more than he feared Protestantism. The bottom line is that the French cardinals, as Catholic as they were, cared more about shutting down rival monarchs. To them, it was more about power than religion. The French phase began in 1632. This was the longest and bloodiest phase, with each side trading blows but failing to establish victory. The two sides were in a stalemate. The Peace of Westphalia ended the war in 1648. So what was the outcome? Who won? Well, nobody really. You could say that the Habsburgs lost more, ceding territory to France, Sweden, and the Netherlands. And although being devastated by the war, not a win, Brandenburg Prussia grew. File this information away. It'll become pretty important in our next lesson. But the impact of the war went much deeper. So, given the multiple religious and political factors at play, record what you think was the broader impact of the 30 Years' War. First of all, it resulted in a massive death toll. 20% of Germany's population was wiped out in the war. Estimates put the death toll of the 30 Years' War as high as 8 million people, over 12 times as many as the American Civil War, which for context accounts for nearly half of the total deaths in American military history. In religious terms, the 30 Years' War ended the idea of a Catholic empire ruling Europe. Next, it changed why wars were fought. Prior to the 30 Years' War, most wars had a religious premise. But in the midst of this massive European conflict, people decided that religion wasn't as good a reason to fight as politics. It also positioned France to become a powerful European nation while solidifying the decline of the Holy Roman Empire. The HRE still existed, but it was toothless and lacked religious unity, leading French writer Voltaire to quip that it was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. Finally, the treaty established fixed boundaries for the nations involved in the conflict, recognizing Europe as a group of equal, independent states. Before Westphalia, governments were subject to outside influences, from larger kingdoms to the Catholic Church, which for centuries had superseded the power of monarchs. That era was over. To this day, the term Westphalian sovereignty is used to describe the principle that a nation has the exclusive right to rule over affairs within its borders, and that each state is equal under international law. The treaty effectively marked the beginning of the modern state system. Due to the removal of control from outside secular or religious entities and the establishment of strong centralized states, Westphalia paved the way for absolute rulers to consolidate their power. The influence of the 30 Years' War cannot be overstated. It changed why nations went to war, formed the modern state system, and ultimately led to absolutism in Central Europe. And if you ever decide to go to Prague, make sure to get a hotel room on the first floor, am I right? To all our Czech friends out there, kidding of course, we know your defenestrating days are over. But we encourage you historians to open the window and take a long look around because history is everywhere. Hey!